Chapter 3. Witchcraft Trials and Persecution. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Exodus 22:18. Little is heard of witchcraft in Scotland before the latter half of the 16th century, but in the year 1563, in the reign of Mary, Queen of Scotland, a strenuous act directed against the practice of witchcraft became law, and was most rigorously enforced. As this has been described as the law under which all the subsequent witch trials took place, its significant phraseology may in part be quoted. The Estates enact that nae person take upon hand to use ony matter of witchcrafts, sorcery or necromancy, nor give themselves forth to have ony sick craft or knowledge thereof, also that nae person seek ony help, response, or consultation at ony sick users or abusers of witchcraft under the pain of death. Curiously enough, the passing of this and similar acts was attended by results as unexpected as they were unforeseen. Belief in witchcraft became the passion of public credulity. Accusations, generally false and often even ludicrous in their solemn foolishness, were trumped up, and action followed, that hurried countless helpless human beings to the stake to die a cruel and shameful death. It was a time of terror, an epoch of superstitious sacrifice, extending and gathering force as the reign of Mary merged into the Regency, only finding pause at the removal of James VI of Scotland to London, there to preside over the united destinies of these islands. As is well known, this monarch evinced a more than personal interest in matters pertaining to the unseen world, and that, gathering up his ideas and conclusions, he embodied them in a singular treatise entitled Demonology. Less creditable to his memory, it is told that not only did he favor executions for this alleged crime, but actually took pleasure in witnessing the sacrifice of the condemned. With the death of James, a phase of quiescence in which quest and sacrifice is entered upon, a lull which lasted for some 15 years. It was again, however, to be broken, this time by the unfortunate intervention and misdirected zeal of the Church itself. The General Assembly, stimulated by a desire for puritanical perfection, awakened the slumbering crudity of belief, that direct satanic power stalked abroad in the land in the form of witchcraft. Condemnatory acts were passed in the years 1640, 43, 44, 45 and 49. Again the stake and tar faggot blazed. The Levitical law was accepted as a too literal injunction, and from this time forward it is the clergy who particularly figure as the pursuers of witches, keen and relentless to a degree, and yet with it all, however misguided the efforts of these churchmen, however cruel their methods, it is only just to their memories to believe in their purity of motive, and to give them all credit for pious and earnest desire to combat and stamp out what to them was in very truth a great evil. Different methods were adopted to establish proof and justify the cases for the accusers, but the one test specially relied upon was to find the actual presence of what has already been described as the witch mark upon the person of the suspected. When this was found, or supposed to be found, it was the deliberate practice to pass through it a sharp needle-like instrument, and if no pain was felt or blood drawn, then guilt was held to be firmly established. A running stream they dare not cross. J. Copeland. So frequent were the accusations that the pricking of witches became a recognized calling, one individual, John Kincaid by name, having such a reputation for skill in this unhallowed work that he seems to have been employed in the principal witch trials of this period, such an entry as, item, mare to John kinked for brooding of her, being of quite common occurrence in the notes of expenses still on record. It is to this second or later period of persecution that the record of witch charge and punishment in the southwest of Scotland really belongs, and from 1656 the records of the civil and ecclesiastical courts teem with accounts of searching inquiry and trial. It must further be remembered that over and above the regularly constituted inquiries of state and church, a great number of commissions were granted by the Privy Council to gentlemen in every county, and almost in every parish, to try persons accused of witchcraft, many of whom suffered the extreme penalty, and of which no particulars can now be gleaned. It is now our purpose to set forth as completely as possible such relative matter and extracts from existing documents as will describe the proceedings as they actually took place in the distinctive localities of the Dumfries and Galloway district, but it may perhaps be here fittingly noted, not without a certain sense of gratification, that this southwestern district, though far from blameless, compares more than favorably with other districts in Scotland, both in fairness of judgment and rigor of punishment. Proceedings in Galloway. Presbytery of Kirkcudbright, April, 1662. A person, named James Welsh, confessed himself guilty of the crime of witchcraft before the Presbytery of Kirkcudbright, but the justices refused to put him upon his trial, because he was a minor when he acknowledged his guilt, and had retracted his extrajudicial confession, but on the 17th of April, 1662, they ordered him to be scourged and put in the correction house, having so grossly prevaricated and delayed so many honest persons. Kirkcudbright, 1671. At an assize held in the burgh of Dumfries in 1671, 8 or more females were charged with witchcraft. 5 of them were eventually sent for trial to Kirkcudbright. Dalry Kirk Session, 1696. Elspeth Mewen, an old woman living alone at a place called Boga, near the farm of Cubbox, in Balmaclellan, was suspected by the countryside of various acts of witching. In particular, she was believed to have at her command a wooden pin that was movable and that could be withdrawn from the base of the rafters resting on the walls of the cottage, which particular part of the building was in these old days called the Kipple Foot. With this pin Elspeth was supposed to have the supernatural power of drawing an exhaustive milk supply from her neighbors' cows merely by placing it in contact with the udder. And this it was reported she practiced freely. Other cantrips laid to her door included capricious interference with the laying power of her neighbors' hens, causing them sometimes to fail altogether, at others to produce in amazing plenteousness. At last complaint was made to the session, and the beadle, by name Lambrock, was sent away with the minister's mare to bring her before the session. On the journey there is a tradition that the mare in a panic of fright sweated great drops of blood at the rising hill near the manse, since known as the Bluidy Brae. After being examined she was sent to Kirkcudbright, where she lay in prison for about 2 years. Dalry Kirk Session, October 15, 1697. The following entry evidently refers to the expense of her maintenance in prison, given for alimenting Elspeth Mewen, alleged of witchcraft in prison, Kirkcudbright, 1698. In Kirkcudbright prison Elspeth Mewen was so inhumanely treated that she frequently implored her tormentors to terminate a life which had become a grievous burden to her. In March, 1698, a commission was appointed by the Privy Council for her trial, along with another woman, Mary Miller, also accused of witchcraft, to meet and convene at Kirkcudbright. The following is an extract from the said commission. Extract from Commission for Judging of Elspeth Mewen and Mary Miller, alleged guilty of witchcraft, 1698. The Lords of His Majesty's Privy Council, being informed that Elspeth Mewen and Mary Miller, both within the stewardry of Kirkcudbright, presently prisoners within the Tolboth of Kirkcudbright, are alleged guilty of the horrid crime of witchcraft, and he's committed several malefices, and considering it will be a great deal of charges and expenses to bring the said Elspeth Mewen and Mary Miller to this place, in order to a trial before the Lords Commissioners of Justiciary, besides, that several inconveniences may arise by their transportation. And the said Lords likewise considering that this horrid crime cannot be tried and judged by any persons in the country without a warrant and commission from their lordships for that effect, and the said Lords being desirous to have the said matter brought to a trial, that the persons guilty may receive condign punishment, and others may be deterred from committing so horrid a crime in time coming. They do hereby give full power, warrant and commission, to Sir John Maxwell of Pollock, Maxwell of Dalswintown, Hume Guffock of Rusco, Adam Newell of Barskioch, Dunbar of Macramore, Thomas Alexander, Stuart Depute of Kirkcudbright, Robert McClelland of Barmagacan, and Mr. Alexander Ferguson of Isle, advocate, and declare any 3 of the foresaid persons to be a sufficient quorum, the said Stuart Depute of Kirkcudbright being one of the 3, to take trial off, and to judge and do justice upon the said Elspeth Mewen and Mary Miller, for the crime of witchcraft. And in order thereto, to might and convene at Kirkcudbright, the 2nd Friday of April next to come, and there to accept for this present commission, and upon their acceptance to administrate the oath of fidelity to the person whom the Lord Justice Clerk or James Montgomery of Lancashire, Clerk to the Justice Court, shall depute and substitute to be Clerk to the present commission, with power to the said commissioners or their said quorum, to choose their own clerk for whom they shall be answerable. In case that the said Lords Justice Clerk and James Montgomery shall refuse to nominate a clerk in this matter, they being first required so to do, with power likewise to the said persons hereby commissioned or their said quorum, to create, make, and constitute serjeants, dempsters, and other members of the said court, and to issue out and cause raise precepts or libels of indictment at the instance of Samuel Cairnmount, writer in Kirkcudbright, as Procurator Fiscal for His Majesty's interest in the said matter. Against the saids Elspeth McCowan and Mary Miller, accused of witchcraft, for summoning and citing them upon 15 days, by delivering to them a full copy of the libel or indictment, with the names and designations of the assizers and witnesses subjoined, and for citing their assizers and witnesses in the ordinary and under the usual pains and certifications, to compare before the said commissioners hereby commission it. With power to the said commissioners or their said quorums, to discern and adjudge them to be burned, or otherwise to be execute to death within such space and after such a manner as they shall think fit, and appoints the said commissioners, their said quorum or clerk, to transmit the hale process which shall be led before them against the said Elspeth McCowan and Mary Miller, and sever all steps thereof and verdict of the inquest to be given thereupon to the said Lords of His Majesty's Privy Council, betwixt and the 15th day of June next to come. On the 26th of July the Committee of Privy Council reported that they had examined the proceedings of the Commissioners in the case of Elspeth Mewen, the report signed by the Lord Advocate, who had been pronounced guilty upon her own confession and the evidence of witnesses of a compact and correspondence with the devil, and of charms and of accession to malefics. It was ordered that the sentence of death against Elspeth should be executed under care of the Steward of Kirkcudbright and his deputies. Found guilty by her own confession, a certain means to end a miserable life, Elspeth Mewen suffered the extreme penalty of being burned at the stake, the execution taking place in what is now known as Silver Craigs Park, on the 24th day of August, 1698. Extracts from Minute Book of the Kirk Session of Kirkcudbright. Janet Robert in Milnburn is delayed to the session for witchcraft, the signs and instances whereof are afterwards recorded. The session therefore recommends to the magistrates to apprehend and incarcerate her till trial be had of that matter. February 6, 1701. As to Janet Robert in Milnburn, it is delayed by Elizabeth Lochlawn, lawful daughter to John Lochlawn Year, there, that the said Elizabeth went to Janet's house, when she was not within, and looking in at the door saw a wheel going about and spinning without the help of any person seen by her, and she went in and essayed to lay hold of the said wheel, but was beat back to the door and her head was hurt, though she saw nobody. And that, after she was in the said Janet's house, being at school with her, the devil appeared to her in the likeness of a man, and did bid her deliver herself over to him, from the crown of her head to the sole of her foot, which she refused to do, saying she would rather give herself to God Almighty. After the devil went away the said Janet, who was present with her, laid bonds on her not to tell. And year after he came a second time to her, being in Janet's house alone, in the likeness of a gentleman, and desired her to go with him, and year after disappeared, seeming not to go out at the door. Robert Crichton's wife farther relates that when she was winnowing corn in Bailey Dunbar's barn, the said Janet came in to her and helped her, though not desired, till she had done, and desired of her some chaff for her cow. She gave her a small quantity in her apron, with which she seemed not to be satisfied, so upon the morrow thereafter, the said Robert Crichton's wife's breast swelled to a great height, which continued for about the space of 5 weeks, so that the young child who was then sucking decayed and vanished away to a shadow. And immediately year after their cow took such a distemper that her milk had neither the color nor taste that it used to have, so that no use could be made of it, all which happened about 3 years ago. It is further delayed by Howell, that being one day in John Robertson's in the Milnburn, he desired to buy 2 hens. They said they had none, but perhaps Janet Robert would do it, and accordingly he asked Janet, who answered she had none to sell to him. He replied, "You have them to eat my good mother's bear when it is sown, but," said he, "my rough lad," meaning his dog, "will perhaps bring them to me." She answered, "Your rough lad will bring none of my hens this 2 days," and before that he went to the town, the dog went mad to the beholding of many. Further, it is delayed, that a friend of the said Janet's living in Rearwick, whose wife was lying on childbed, did send his daughter to Janet to borrow some money which she refused to give at the first, yet upon a second consideration she gave her 2/14, but still assured the lass that she would lose them. "What," says the lass, "am I a child yet?" And for the mere security she took a purse out of her pocket in which there were no holes, and took out some turmeric, which she had in it, and did put in the 2/14 and through the neck of her purse, as she used perhaps to do, assuring herself that she should not lose them now. And went home, and when she came there, she opened the purse to take out the 2/14, and she had nothing. A Witch Trial. J. Copeland. Further, it is delayed by John Jimser's wife, Agnes Kirk, that the said Janet came one day there, and desired a hare's book, carcass, which she refused, and since that time their dog hath neither been able to run or take ane hare. February 12, 1701. As to Janet Robert, John Bodden in Milnburn relates, that at the lake wake of his child 3 years ago, Patrick Linton's son heard a great noise about Janet's house, so that he was afraid to go out at the door, and John Bodden himself going to the door heard it also, at which he was greatly affrighted. Upon the morrow year after, the said Janet went into John's house, and they told her what they heard the night before about her house. Janet answered, "It is nothing but my clock and hen," but John declared that all the hens within 20 miles would not have made such a noise. The said John further relates that, upon the Wednesday after Janet was incarcerated, he did see about cock-crow a candle going through the said Janet's house, but saw nothing holding it. The finding, April 10, 1701. As to Janet Robert, an extract of the delations against her being sent to Edinburgh, and a commission written for to pursue her legally, it was denied in regard they judged the delations not to be sufficient presumptions of guilt, so as to found a process of that nature. Notwithstanding thereof the said Janet consented to an act of banishment, and went hence to Ireland. Extracts from Session Book of Twinholme. April 18, 1703. Jean Murray in Ireland Ton, suspect of witchcraft, being apprehended and incarcerated in the Tolbooth of Kirkcudbright upon a warrant from the civil magistrate, the Minister, is desired to cause sight to the next session any whom he can find to have any presumptions of witchcraft agt the said Jean. April 25, 1703. The Minister reports that he, as he was desired, has caused sight some persons anent Jean Murray's suspected witchcraft, such as, first, Florence Sprott, who being called and comparing, declares that by the report of the country Jean Murray has been under the name of a witch for many years. 2d. John Gown in Culcray, in Tongland, declares, that he having a daughter of Jean Murray's with him, the said Jean came one day to his house before her daughter went from him, and the said Jean having conceived some anger because her daughter came to him without the said Jean's consent, she staying a little in his house, went away to a neighbor's house, and stayed there all night, and the said John going to her tomorrow, when she saw the said John she inquired how it came to pass that he took her daughter without her consent. And he desiring her back again to his house, but she by no entreaty would go to his house, and left the said John in a rage, and within about 4 days his wife took a dreadful stitch through her, as if she had been stricken with a whinger or knife, and his wife desiring earnestly that Jean Murray would come and see her, but the said Jean would never come to see her, although bidden by Janet Dallin in Erlinton, and so the said John's wife continued in great pain until she died. 3rd, Isabel Mgown in Netherton, who, being called and comparing, declares that Jean Murray has been under the name of a witch for many years by the report of the country. 4th, Christian Bissett in Glencroft, declares that Jean Murray has been under the name of a witch since she came to the parish, which is more than 10 years. May 2, 1703. Janet Mahaffey in The Mark of Twynham, declares that, in harvest 1700, Jean Murray came one night to the said Mark after they had been at the mill. And the said Janet Mahaffey going to milk the kye, disowned the said Jean, not knowing that it was she, neither did any other about the Mark own the said Jean that night, and Jean going away without any alms that night, upon the morrow their milk was made useless, having a loathsome smell. Likewise the said Janet Mahaffey fell sick, and was like a daft body for about 8 days, at the end whereof both the said Janet and their milk grew better. May 2, 1703. Margaret Kingan in Englishtown, declares along with Quinton Fairmount, Kirk officer, that John Neilson in Waltrees said to them, that this last where Jean Murray was selling about a peck of corn to the said John, and the said John would not give the said Jean what she would have for the said corn, and so the said Jean went away from him in anger, and the said John's horse did sweat until he died. May 2, 1703. Robert Gelly and Sarah Nacht, in chapel in Tongland. Having been hearing sermon in Twynham this day, were desired by the minister to wait upon the session, which was to meet after sermon, which accordingly they did, and the said Sarah declares before the session that upon a day about midsummer last, Jean Murray came into the chapel and sought a piece bread to a lass that she had with her, and Sarah Nacht said she had no bread ready. Jean Murray said, she, viz. the lass that was with her, would it maybe take some of these pottage, Sarah having some pottage among her hands, but however, Sarah gave her none, and Jean Murray going away muttering, said, either, you may have more loss, or, you shall have more loss, and within about 6 hours or thereby thereafter, Robert Gelly lost a horse, and that the said Jean came never to Robert Gelly's house since that time, and the said Robert declares that he has still the thoughts that his horse was killed with divelry. May 2, 1703. Robert Bryce, Robert Burney, and William Brown, ruling elders, declared that Thomas Craig in Barwinock said to them that upon a day more than 2 years ago Jean Murray came to his house and sought his horse, and began to discourse to the S.D. Thomas and his wife about flesh. Thomas said they had no flesh. She went away in a rage and said, God send them more against the next time she should come there, and within a week the said Thomas lost a kye by drowning. The finding, May 9, 1703. Robert Bryce attended the presbytery. The minister reports that Jean Murray, having sought an act of banishment to transport herself out of the stewardry of Kirkcudbright within or at the end of 10 days, and never to be found within the same again under the pain of death, is let out of prison. Members of the Kirk Session of Twynham at this time, William Clark, minister, James Robison, Thomas Robison, John Harries, Ninian Ney, Robert Bryce, James Milray, William Brown, Thomas Sproat, James McKenna, Alexander Halliday, Robert Burney. Parish of Ur. The following is an extract from the Presbytery Records of Dumfries, dated April 22, 1656, John Quan in Ur, compared, confessing that he went to Dundrennan, to a witch wife, for medicine for his sick wife, and that he got a salve for her, and that the wife said to him, if the salve went in his wife would live, if not she would die. Janet Thompson in Ur, comparing, confessed that she went to the said witch, and got a salve to her mother, and that the witch bade her take her mother, and lay her firth 24 hours, and said that her mother got her sickness between the mill and her own house, and bade her tack her to the place where she took it, and wash her with elder leaves. She also confessed that the deceased Thomas Min and his friend sent her at another time to the same witch, whose name is Janet Miller. They were both rebuked by the presbytery, and referred to their own session to be rebuked from the pillar in sackcloth. And the witch Janet Miller was further detained, the parish minister to announce from the pulpit that all who could were required to give evidence of sick devilish practices. Kirkpatrick Durham Kirk Session. At Bridge of Ur, Isabel Min called Jean Wallace a witch. Jean told the session. Both women were summoned to appear. The session decided there was no witchcraft in the matter. The session, having shown them the evil of such strife and scolding, and having exhorted them to live in peace and be reconciled to each other, made them promise each to other that no such strife should be between them any more. Parish of Carskerne. An arbitrary incident of witch detection took place during the ministry of John Semple, a man who, if somewhat eccentric, was graced with extraordinary piety and natural ability. Of him it is recorded that upon a certain time when a neighboring minister was distributing tokens before the sacrament, and was reaching a token to a certain woman, Mr. Semple, standing by, said, "Hold your hand, she hath gotten too many tokens already, she is a witch," which, though none suspected her then, she herself confessed to be true, and was deservedly put to death for the same. John Semple died at Carskerne about the year 1667. Extract from Minnigaff Kirk Session Records. There being a flagrant report that some persons in this parish in and about the house of Bargally, have practiced that piece of devilry, commonly called turning the riddle, as also it being reported that ye principal person is one Mally Redmond, an Irish woman, for present nurse in the house of Barclay to ye young Lady Tondergy, as also that Alex Kelly, Gilbert Kelly his son, and Marion Murray, formerly servant in Barclay, now in Holme, were witnesses erto, the session appoints ye said Mally and ye said witnesses to be cited to ye next meeting. Mally, after some delay, at length appeared, but positively denied having practiced that piece of devilry turning the riddle, but acknowledged that she had seen it done in her father's house in Ireland by two girls on the occasion of something having been stolen, to fear ye guilty person that it might restore that was stolen. Mally was exhorted to be ingenuous, but she persisted in asserting her innocence. The session, therefore, resolved to proceed to proof. The proceedings occupy a number of pages, and are too long for insertion, but the particulars are comprehended in the deposition of Marion Murray, aged 18 years, having been sworn, purged of malice and partial counsel, deponeth that she, not having seen any other person doing it before her, together with ye nurse held the riddle between ym. Having a pair of little scissors fastened into ye rim of the riddle, whereof ye nurse Mally Redmond held one point and she the other. And that ye nurse mumbled some words mentioning Peter and Paul, and that when the nurse said these words the riddle stirred less or more, and after ye nurse had said ye words she bade ye deponent say them too, and that she accordingly said the same things back again to the nurse, and that the deponent had said to ye nurse Mally before ever she meddled with it that if she knew yer was anything evil in doing of it she would not meddle with it, and ye nurse replied yer was no evil in it. And further that to sift the meddling with it she offered to take ye child from ye lady's arms, but ye young lady put her to it, bidding her go do it. As also that further ye said Marion depones that ye same day, a little after, ye young lady bade her go to ye barn and yer do it over again with ye nurse, which she positively refused, whereupon ye young lady did it herself with all the circumstances she and the nurse had done it in the chambers before, moreover, that some days after, the chamber door being close upon the young lady and her nurse Mally, ye deponent, looking through a hole in ye door, saw ye nurse and ye lady standing and ye riddle betwixt ym. As before, but heard nothing. And further, that ye lady and her nurse bade her deny these things, but did not bid her swear to it. For her participation in the affair the young Lady Tondergy, Mrs. Janet Blair, was cited before the session, and having expressed her penitence for being ensnared into such sinful practices, she and Marion Murray subscribed a declaration to be read before the congregation, abhorring and renouncing all spells and charms usual to wizards, and having been rebooked and exhorted to greater watchfulness for the future, they were dismissed. The originator of the affair, Mally Redmond, after making her appearance to be rebooked before the congregation, was banished the parish. But the execution of the sentence was, through influence, delayed till Tondergy younger, his child, should be weaned. Parish of New Luce. The only point of interest in connection with the parish of New Luce is that the chief witness against Maggie Osborne, who was burned as a witch at Ayr, was an elder in the Moor Kirk of Luce, to which reference has already been made. Parish of Whithorn. An old woman named Elspeth Mkend lived on the farm of Pall Mallet, near Whithorn. On one occasion she was arraigned before the magistrates of Whithorn for some supposed uncanny doings, but the authorities, not endorsing the general belief, set her at liberty. So disappointed and enraged were the community at her liberation that they caught her and inserted a host of new brass pins in her body, and afterwards dragged her down to the shore at Dinans, holding her below water until life was nearly extinct. The old woman never fairly recovered from this cruel treatment, and when she died her remains were objected to as not being fit to rest in the kirkyard. Parish of Kirkmaiden. In the parish of Kirkmaiden we find a zealous prosecutor of witches in the person of the Reverend Mr. Marshall, who was ordained in 1697. He was assisted in his efforts by a woman brought from the town of Wigtown, who was credited with possessing an expert faculty of at once being able to distinguish and pick out witches and warlocks from amongst ordinary mortals, however similar to them in outward appearance. All the adults in the parish were summoned to attend at the parish church on a given date and pass through the church from one door to the other. The minister placed himself in the precentor's box, with writing materials at his hand, the witch-finder being seated beside him. When witch or warlock passed, the woman tramped on the minister's toes and the name was at once recorded. A long list was thus made out, and the kirk session afterwards inquired into the charges brought against the various individuals, which proceedings were afterwards inserted in the session records. The stigma thus cast upon many families in the district was only removed by influence being brought to bear to destroy by burning the accusing pages of the session records. Tradition asserts that retribution at the hands of the Kirkmaiden witches overtook the reverend gentleman, for, taking his accustomed walk from the manse to the church, a hare running out of the churchyard crossed his path, and from that time forward he was never again able to open his mouth in the pulpit of Kirkmaiden Church. He was shortly afterwards translated to Kirkham, and though he often visited Kirkmaiden he could never occupy the pulpit, even on the day of sacramental observance. So late as 1805 a trial took place at Kirkcudbright connected with witchcraft which aroused considerable excitement in the district, creating keen interest as well in legal circles. This was the trial of Jean Maxwell, who was accused of pretending to exercise witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, and conjuration, and undertaking to tell fortunes. The point which is of note, and calls for accentuation is, that Jean Maxwell was arraigned, not for being a witch, but for the imposition of pretending to possess witch power. This has been commented upon by Professor John Ferguson of Glasgow in his paper, Bibliographical Notes on the Witchcraft Literature of Scotland, Publications of the Edinburgh Bibliographical Society, Volume 3, 1899, in which he says, "It will be noticed that Jean is indicted for pretending to exercise witchcraft," etc. In fact, the indictment is made under the Act of George II Cap 5, which repeals the statutes against witchcraft. It is an interesting case, as having occurred under the repealing Act. The following is the indictment: Jean Maxwell, present prisoner in the Tolbooth of Kirkcudbright, you are indicted at the instance of Robert Gordon, writer in Kirkcudbright, Procurator Fiscal of the Steward Court of the Stewartry of Kirkcudbright for His Majesty's interest, that albeit by the Act of Parliament passed in the 9th year of the reign of King George II. Cap 5th, intituled An Act to Repeal the Statute made in the 1st year of the reign of James I, intituled An Act against Conjuration, Witchcraft, and Dealing with Evil and Witched Spirits, except so much thereof as repeals an Act of the 5th year of the reign of Queen Elizabeth, against conjurations, enchantments, and witchcraft. And to repeal an Act passed in the Parliament of Scotland in the 9th Parliament of Queen Mary, intituled Anentis Witchcraft, and for punishing such persons as pretend to exercise or use any kind of witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, or conjuration. It is enacted, that if any person shall from and after the 24th day of June next, pretend to exercise or use any kind of witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, or conjuration, or undertake to tell fortunes or pretend from his or her skill or knowledge in occult or crafty science, to discover where or in what manner any goods or chattels supposed to have been lost, may be found, every person so offending being therefore lawfully convicted on indictment of information, in that part of Great Britain called England, or on indictment or libel, in that part of Great Britain called Scotland, shall for every such offence suffer imprisonment for the space of 1 whole year without bail or mainprize, and once in every quarter of the said year, in some market town of the proper county, upon the market day there, stand openly on the pillory for the space of 1 hour, and also shall, if the court by which such judgment shall be given think fit, be obliged to give surety for his or her good behavior, in such sum, and for such time as the said court shall judge proper, according to the circumstances of the offense, and in such case shall be further imprisoned until such sureties be given. Notwithstanding of the said Act of Parliament, you, the said Jean Maxwell, are guilty, actor, art and part of pretending to exercise witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, and conjuration, and of undertaking to tell fortunes, etc., etc. in the manner particularly mentioned in the deposition of Jean Davidson, hereto annexed. In so far as you the said Jean Maxwell, did, upon Thursday the 27th, Friday the 28th, and Saturday the 29th days of December last, in the year 1804, and upon Tuesday the 1st and Tuesday the 8th days of January last, in the year 1805, or upon some one or other of the days or nights of these months, or of the month of November immediately preceding, or of the month of February immediately following, at Little Cocklick, in the parish of and Stourtry of Kirkcudbright, pretend to tell fortunes by teacups and the grounds of tea, and did tell to Jean Davidson, servant to Francis Scott, farmer in Little Cocklick aforesaid, that she would soon bear a bastard to a certain young man, Hugh Rafferton, which you said you could prevent by certain means. And you, the said Jean Maxwell, caused the said Jean Davidson to rub or anoint her forehead and other parts of her head with a liquid contained in bottle produced by you, which so much intoxicated and disordered the said Jean Davidson that she would have done anything that you the said Jean Maxwell had asked her to do, and you the said Jean Maxwell, availing yourself of the situation that she the said Jean Davidson was in, declared to her that the devil would speedily appear and tear her in pieces, unless she obeyed you, the said Jean Maxwell, in every particular. And you, the said Jean Maxwell, caused the said Jean Davidson take oaths of secrecy for the purpose of concealing your wicked and felonious purposes. That on the said 27th day of December last you, the said Jean Maxwell, caused the said Jean Davidson produce a guinea note, which you pretended to hold up in a small bit of paper, putting round it some lint, and stitching in it 9 pins, after which you gave it to the said Jean Davidson and ordered her to cast it into the fire, which she did accordingly. And you, the said Jean Maxwell, then ordered the said Jean Davidson to bring one of her shifts and 3 shillings with it, which you sewed up in the tail of the shift, and said that the shift was to be consumed in the fire, as an offering to the devil, who was to appear at the time of the burning of the shift, in the shape of either a bull or a swine, and at the same time you, the said Jean Maxwell, gave to the said Jean Davidson a powder sewed up in a piece of fine linen and stuck through with 9 pins, which you enjoined her to wear at her breast till the day of her death, and tell no mortal of it. That on the said 28th day of December last you, the said Jean Maxwell, told the said Jean Davidson that the devil had rejected 2 sixpences of the money formerly sent him in the tail of the shift, that he insisted in lieu of the sixpences to have 2 shillings with heads on them, and that he was up and stirring, and must be satisfied, and the said Jean Davidson, having furnished the shillings, you, the said Jean Maxwell, after stamping on the ground twice or thrice with your foot, pretended to hand them to Satan as if he had stood behind you. That on the said 29th day of December last you, the said Jean Maxwell, declared to the said Jean Davidson that the devil was still up, and that he must have a man's shirt of plain linen, and in it a shoulder of mutton, and the said Jean Davidson, terrified by your threats, gave you a check shirt of the said Francis Scott's, her master, together with a shoulder of mutton, also his property, tied up in the shirt, and you the said Jean Maxwell, tied up these articles in your own budget. And then, telling the said Jean Davidson that all this was insufficient to lay the devil, you asked her for half a crown more, and the said Jean Davidson in confusion and fright gave you $1, which you said would do as well, and that at any rate it must not be taken back being once offered, and then you the said Jean Maxwell, went to the back of the byre at Little Cocklick aforesaid, and returned and told the said Jean Davidson that you had laid the devil so that he could not come nearer her than the back of the byre, but cautioned her strongly not to travel that way nor farther after it was dark. That on the said 1st day of January last, you the said Jean Maxwell returned to Little Cock Lick aforesaid, and told the said Jean Davidson, that Hugh Rafferton was to be with her on the Thursday ensuing, very lovingly and ready to marry her, or do whatever she should ask of him, and moreover, you the said Jean Maxwell declared that, if the said Jean Davidson used Hugh Rafferton harshly, and refused to marry him, Hugh Rafferton would lose his reason and go stark mad at the end of 8 weeks, that in the meantime however you must have another guinea note for the devil, with a faced shilling in it, and the money was furnished by the said Jean Davidson, when you the said Jean Maxwell clipped or pretended to cut the note, in small pieces with scissors, pretending that in this manner it was to be presented to the devil alongst with the faced shilling. That soon after this, you the said Jean Maxwell, told the said Jean Davidson that the first note was not accepted, and that you must have an old and very tattered note and 3 shillings more, which having been furnished by the said Jean Davidson, you the said Jean Maxwell bound up the note with paper and lint, and having stuck it with 9 pins gave it to the said Jean Davidson, who threw it into the fire, and you the said Jean Maxwell, after stamping on the ground, handed the 3 shillings behind you so that Satan might receive them as you pretended he had received the former presents. That these things being done, you the said Jean Maxwell left the said Jean Davidson at her father's house at Killymingan, in the parish of Kirkgoonsian, on the said 1st day of January last, declaring that Hugh Rafferton should wait on her in deep humility on the Thursday ensuing, and that all the money offered to Satan should be returned into the said Jean Davidson's chest on the subsequent Friday morning by sunrising, and that all should be, and really was, perfectly right. That on the said 8th day of January last you the said Jean Maxwell again waited on the said Jean Davidson, at the house of the said Francis Scott, in Little Cock Lick aforesaid, and told that all was gone wrong, that the devil had proved too strong for you, the said Jean Maxwell, and had rent a check apron given you by the said Jean Davidson formerly for a burnt offering, and you the said Jean Maxwell pretended to show the distinct marks of Satan's claws, and the mark of his thumb on your arm, adding, that he could not be laid without the aid of John George, commonly called the devil-raiser of and for that end, you the said Jean Maxwell demanded 2 notes more, and 3 pieces of flesh meat, one of them to be pork, which you professed to roll up at great peril in the check apron, and you the said Jean Maxwell also insisted to have the said Jean Davidson's duffel cloak, but the said Jean Davidson, having by this time got into the use of her reason, got the better of the terror of the oaths of secrecy imposed upon her by the said Jean Maxwell, managed so as to detain you until a constable was sent for, who took you into custody and carried you before the Reverend Dr. James Muirhead of Logan, one of His Majesty's Justices of the Peace for the Stowetry of Kirkcudbright, in whose presence you emitted a declaration, upon the 9th day of January last, in the year 1805, which declaration is subscribed by your mark, and by the said Dr. James Muirhead, because you declared that you could not write, and the said declaration being to be used in evidence against you the said Jean Maxwell, will in due time be lodged with the steward clerk, that you may have an opportunity of seeing the same. At least times and place aforesaid, witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, and conjuration, were pretended to be exercised and used, and fortunes were undertaken to be told, all in manner particularly before mentioned, and you the said Jean Maxwell, are guilty actor, art and part of the said crimes, all which, or part thereof, being found proven by the verdict of an assize before the steward depute of the Stowetry of Kirkcudbright, and his substitutes, in a court to be holden by them or either of them within the courthouse of Kirkcudbright. Upon the 21st day of June, in the present year 1805, you the said Jean Maxwell, ought to be imprisoned in the Tolbooth of Kirkcudbright by the space of 1 whole year without bail or mainprise, and once in every quarter of the said year, to stand openly in the jugs or pillory, at the market cross of the burgh of Kirkcudbright, by the space of 1 hour, and to be farther imprisoned in the said Tolbooth, for your good behaviour, in such sum and for such time as the said court shall judge proper, agreeably to the provisions and enactments of the said Act of Parliament, to deter others from committing the like crimes in time coming. The Procurator Fiscal concluded his proof, and the Steward Depute remitted the cause to the verdict of the assize. The persons that passed upon the assize of the said Jean Maxwell, returned their verdict to the court, and the tenor thereof is as follows. At Kirkcudbright, the 21st day of June, 1805, the assize being enclosed, did make choice of Alexander Melville of Barwar to be their chancellor, and William Muir, factor for the Earl of Selkirk, to be their clerk, and having considered the indictment raised at the instance of Robert Gordon, writer in Kirkcudbright, Procurator Fiscal of Court for His Majesty's interest, against Jean Maxwell, present prisoner in the Tolbooth of Kirkcudbright, the panel, with the interlocutor of the steward. Depute of the Stewardry of Kirkcudbright thereon. And the whole proof adduced, they unanimously find the said Jean Maxwell guilty of the crimes charged against her in the said indictment. In testimony, whereof, etc. Signed, Alexer Melville, Chancellor, William Muir, Clerk, Court adjourned for a week, Kirkcudbright, June 28, 1805, the Steward Depute having considered the verdict of the assize, bearing date the 21st day of June current, and returned into court that day against Jean Maxwell, the panel, whereby she is found guilty of pretending to exercise witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, and conjuration, and of undertaking to tell fortunes, contrary to the enactments and provisions of the Act of Parliament passed in the 5th year of the reign of King George II, Chapter 5, in the manner charged against her in the indictment, at instance of the Procurator Fiscal of Court, the Steward Depute, in respect of the said verdict, discerns and adjudges the said Jean Maxwell to be carried back from the bar to the Tolbooth of Kirkcudbright, and to be imprisoned therein for the space of 1 whole year, without bail or mainprise, and once in every quarter of the said year to stand openly upon a market day in the jugs or pillory, at the market cross of the burgh of Kirkcudbright, for the space of 1 hour, etc. Signed, Alexer Gordon. It only remains to be added that this sentence was rigorously carried out. A small, and now scarce volume, containing a full account of the trial, was published at Kirkcudbright the same year, of which the following is a copy of the title page, Remarkable Trial of Jean Maxwell the Galloway Sorceress, which took place at Kirkcudbright on the 28th day of June last, 1805, for pretending to exercise witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, conjuration, etc. And that distilled by magic sleights, shall raise such artificial sprites, as by the strength of their illusion shall draw him on to his confusion. Macbeth. Proceedings in Dumfriesshire. Concerning Dumfriesshire there falls to be recorded numerous instances of accusation and trial, which includes the ever-to-be-regretted consummation of fanaticism in this district, the burning of 9 unhappy women on the sands of Dumfries in the year 1659. Burgh of Dumfries. Extract from the Dumfries Burgh Treasurer's Books, May 27, 1657. Detailed items of expenditure incurred at the burning of 2 women convicted of witchcraft, for 38 load of pites to burn the 2 women. £3 Scots. Mare, given to William Edgar for ane tar barrel, 12s, for ane herring barrel, 14s. Given to John Shotrick, for carrying the TWA barrels to the pledge, house, SXS. Mare, given to the 4 officers that day that the witch was burnt, at the Provost and Bailiff's command, 24s. Given to Thomas Anderson for the 2 stoops and the 2 steeves, to which the women were tied, 30s. Resolution of Kirk Session of Dumfries, 1658. The Kirk Session of Dumfries, after solemn deliberation on the subject, required the minister to announce from the pulpit that all persons having evidence to give against such as were under suspicion of the heinous and abominable sin of witchcraft, should be ready to furnish the same to the session without delay, and at their next meeting the elders wisely qualified the order, by resolving that anyone who charged another with being guilty of sick devilish practices, without due reason, should be visited with the severest discipline of the Kirk. Official information regarding the burning of the 9 women on the sands of Dumfries, April 13, 1659. These women were first strangled and then burned. The following particulars were gleaned from the books of the High Court of Justiciary kept at the Register House, Edinburgh, 1659. The court was opened at Dumfries on the 2nd of April, in the above year, by the Commissioners in Criminal Cases to the people in Scotland. Judge Mosley and Judge Lawrence, and that 10 women, each charged with diverse acts of witchcraft, were brought before them for trial. The proceedings appear to have lasted until the 5th. One of the accused, Helen Tate, had a rather narrow escape, the jury finding by a plurality of voices that the deity in her case was not clearly proven. Nevertheless, before being dismissed from the bar, she was required to find security to the extent of £50 for her good behavior, and that she would banish herself from the parish. The 9 other unfortunates were all convicted, as is shown by the subjoined minute, giving the finding of the jury in the deliverance of the judge, as pronounced by the official Dempster, F. Goyen, Dumfries, the 5th of April, 1659. The commissioners and judges Agnes Cummings, Janet Ngowan, Jean Thompson, marked. Clerk, Janet Kendrick, Agnes Clerk, Janet Corsane, Helen Moorhead, and Janet Collon, as found guilty of the several articles of witchcraft mentioned in the dictates, to be ta'en upon Wednesday come 8 days to the ordinary place of execution for the burgh of Dumfries, and there, between 2 and 4 hours of the afternoon, to be strangled at stakes till they be dead, and thereafter their bodies to be burned to ashes, and all their movable goods to be a Shiite. Further, it is ordained that Helen Moorhead's movables be intromitted with by the Sheriff of Nithsdale, to seize upon and harry the semen for the king's use. The burning of the 9 women on the sands of Dumfries, April 13, 1659. Resolution of the Dumfries Presbytery regarding the attendance of clergymen before the carrying out of the sentence, and at the actual burning of the women, on the sands, April 5, 1659. The Presbytery have appointed Mr. Hugh Henry Son, Mr. William Gore, Mr. George Campbell, Mr. John Brown, Mr. Joe Welsh, Mr. George Johnston, Mr. William Hay, and Mr. Gabriel Semple, to attend the 9 witches, and that they take their own convenient opportunity to confer with them, also that they be assisting to the brethren of Dumfries and Galloway the day of the execution. Dumfries, November 14, 1664. An edict from the town council, the council being informed that Janet Burns, commonly reputed a witch, and Coho hath been banished out of several burghs, and put out of this burgh in the month of August last, for cheating the people upon pretence of knowledge of all things done by them in time past, or that may fall out in time coming, with certification to be scourged if ever she was sane within the burgh thereafter, and being well informed that she was sane within the town on Saturday. They have ordained that intimation be made by took of drum, that none of the inhabitants reset or give might or drink unto the said Janet Burns, Court of Justiciary, Tolbooth of Dumfries, May 18, 1671. Warrant for the execution of 2 alleged witches, magistrates of Dumfries, forasmuch as in ane Court of Justiciary, holden be us within the Tolbooth of Dumfries, upon the 15th day of May instant, Janet Muldrich, and Elspeth Thompson, now found guilty be ane assize of the several articles of witchcraft specified in the verdict given against them thereanent. Were discerned and adjudged be us, the Lords Commissioners of Justiciary, to be ta'en upon Thursday next, the 18th day of May instant, betwixt 2 and 4 hours in the afternoon, to the ordinary place of execution, for the town of Dumfries, and there to be worried at ane stake till they be dead, and thereafter their bodies to be burnt to ashes, and all their movable goods and gear to be escheat. You shall therefore cause put the said sentence to do execution, whereanent their presence shall be your warrant. Given at Dumfries the 16th day of May, 1671. Court of Justiciary, Dumfries, 1709. Last trial for witchcraft in Scotland. The accused was named Elspeth Rule, the indictment against her being that she was by habit and repute a witch, and had used threatening expressions towards persons at enmity with her, who, in consequence of such menace, suffered from the death of friends or the loss of cattle, while one of them became mad. The jury by a majority of votes found the charges proven, and the judge condemned the prisoner to be burned upon the cheek with a hot iron and banished for life. It is told how, when this brutal act of branding the cheek was being carried out, smoke was seen issuing from the poor woman's mouth. Dumfries and Major Weir, the notorious Edinburgh warlock, a slight connecting link with Dumfries. In his more youthful days Major Weir led an active military life, serving as an officer in the Puritan army during the Civil War, 1641. In the registers of the estates under March 3, 1647, reference is made to a supplication by Major Thomas Weir, asking that the Parliament wold ordain John Acheson, keeper of the magazine, to redeliver to the supplicant the band given by him to the said John upon the receipt of our 1,000 weight of polder, 2,000 weight of match, and 1,000 weight of ball, sent with the supplicant to Dumfries for furnishing that part of the country. Presbytery of Dumfries, Southern District, March, 1692. Marion Dixon in Blackshaw, Isabel Dixon in Locherwood, Agnes Dixon, daughter of Isabel, and Marion Herbert son in Mousewaldbank, had for a long time been suspected of the abominable and horrid crime of witchcraft, and were believed to have committed many grievous malefics upon several persons their neighbors and others. It was declared to be damnifying to all good men and women living in the country thereabouts, who cannot assure themselves of safety of their lives by such frequent malefics as they commit. Under these circumstances, James Fraid, John Martin, William Nicholson, and Thomas Jaffrey in Blackshaw, John Dixon in Slop of Locherwoods, John Dixon in Locherwoods, and John Dixon in Overton of Locherwoods, took it upon them to apprehend the women, and carried them to be imprisoned at Dumfries by the sheriff, which, however, the sheriff did not consent to till after the 6 men had granted a bond engaging to prosecute, fortified with a certificate from the Presbytery of Dumfries, who were fully convinced of the guilt of the women, and of the many malefics committed by them. The men applied to the Privy Council for a commission to try the delinquents. The Lords ordered the women to be transported to Edinburgh for trial. Kirk Session of Caerlaverock. Charge of alleged divination brought at their instance, before the Dumfries Presbytery, March 22, 1697, compared John Ferguson in Wood Barnes, who acknowledged his scandalous carriage in charming and turning the key at Bankend conformed to the accusation, but says he knew not there was any evil in it. The Presbytery appoint him to stand on the pillar in the church of Caerlaverock, and be sharply rebuked for his scandalous practice, and recommends him to the magistrates to be secured till he give bail to answer and satisfy conform to this act. The actual circumstance connected with this charge of alleged divination are briefly as follows. About the middle of January, 1697, 2 men returning from Dumfries entered the tavern of William Nairns at Bankend of Caerlaverock. These were John Ferguson of Wood Barnes, Cummertrees, and William Richardson, Cummertreestown. On leaving the inn, Richardson discovered that a sack of provisions had been taken from the saddle of his horse, which had been tied to a ring at the door. Entering the house, he made known his loss, declaiming loudly against the thief. In the utmost sympathy with his friend's loss, Ferguson declared he could soon find out who the thief was, and called out that 2 Bibles should be brought to him at once, to which the landlord stoutly demurred, but Ferguson threatened that unless he got his own way he would make bloody work among them, and 2 Bibles were accordingly brought to the said John Ferguson, who brought a key out of his pocket and put the one end of it within one Bible and the bowl end out, clasping the Bible upon it, and 2 holding the bowl of the key upon their fingers. The said John then read 3 verses of the 50th Psalm out of the 2nd Bible, beginning always at the 18th verse, always naming a person before he began to read, till they came to William Kinnell in the same town, and when they named him, and were reading the said scripture, the key and the Bible turned about and fell on the table. This was done 3 times, as attested by James Tate, Mason, who is quartered in Town Head, James Ferguson, servitor to George Maxwell of Isle, George Ferguson in Bankend, and William Nairns, in whose house it was done. Extracts from Iron Grey Kirk Session Records. September 24, 1691. David Muirhead of Drumpark and his wife, being called before the session and examined anent ane strife betwixt them and Janet Sinclair, submitted themselves to the will of the session. Janet Sinclair also submitted to the will of the session for saying that she doubted Drumpark's wife of murder and witchcraft, and is appointed to receive public rebuke before the congregation. August 30, 1691. William Anderson in Hall of Forest, being called before the session for bringing his child to a smith to be charmed with ane forge hammer, confessed his sin and received a rebuke before the session. November 13, 1692. John Charters in Barnclay, being called before the session as witness nominate by James Wright to prove witchcraft against Janet Kirk, denied that he knew anything of witchcraft in her. Margaret Smith, wife of John Johnston, being called before the session, declared in her hearing that Janet Kirk, being brought into Elizabeth Johnston, being grievously tormented with sickness like to distraction, pronounced these words, that, if God had taken the health from her, let him given it again. And if the devil had taken it from her, to give it her again. On which she was rebuked. April 16, 1693. Jean Stott, Ingliston, confessed before the session that she blessed God if Jean Greer's prayings had any pith that they lighted on a cow and not on a person, and did say that Jean Kirkpatrick did gather root-grown briars on a Sabbath day, and nominate Agnes Patten for a witness. The session found wrath and malice among the inhabitants of Ingliston, and the minister was sent as peacemaker. Jean Stott obeyed the minister and forgave Jean Greer, and also required forgiveness of her, which she refused till further advisement. Parish of Iron Grey. Traditional account of the sacrifice of a reputed witch by enclosing her in a tar barrel, setting it alight, and rolling it into the water of Culloden, in the reign of James VI. Of Scotland, or under the early government of his son Charles, tradition tells of a woman that was burnt as a witch in the parish of Iron Grey, about 7 miles west from Dumfries. In a little mud-walled cottage, in the lower end of the Bishop's Forest, and nigh the banks of the water of Culloden, resided a poor widow woman, who earned her bread by spinning with a pole, and by weaving stockings from a clue of yarn depending from her bead strings. She lived alone, and was frequently seen on a summer's eve, sitting upon a jagged rock, which overhung the routing burn, or gathering sticks, late in a November evening, among the rowan tree roots, nigh the dells which signalized the sides of that romantic stream. She had also, sometimes, lying in her window a black-letter Bible, whose boards are covered with the skin of a fumert, and which had 2 very grotesque clasps of brass to close it with when she chose. Her lips were sometimes seen to be moving when she went to church. And she was observed to predict shower or sunshine at certain periods, which predictions often came to be realized. The Bishop of Galloway was repeatedly urged to punish this witch, and lest it should be reported to the king that he refused to punish witches, he at last caused her to be brought before him, nigh to the spot. She was rudely forced from her dwelling, and several neighbors of middle or of old age were cited to declare all the wicked things she had done. She was sentenced to be drowned in the routing burn. But the crowd insisted that she should be shut up in a tar barrel and hurled into the Culloden. Almost against the bishop's consent, this latter death was consummated. The wretched woman was enclosed in a barrel, fire was set to it, and it was rolled, in a blaze, into the waters of Culloden. Such, says the tradition of no very doubtful date, was the savage end of one who was reputed a witch. The spot where, 'tis said, the prelate sat, is yet called Bishop's Butt. The well from which she drew the water for her domestic use, and where the young rustic belles washed their faces, still retains the name of the witch's well, and a pool in the Culloden, nigh to the well, often bears the name of the witch's pool. Even some rocks nigh to the routing bridge are still pointed out, where she was wont to sit, and a hollow into which, say some, she used to throw an elfin clue. That wood yet feathering the hill side west from Drum Park, always bears the name of the Bishop's Forest, and the sylvan ravine, furrowed by a brawling brook, has been, by some now in their graves, named the Warlock's Glen. Parish of Closebon. Janet Fraser, called before the Presbytery of Dumfries, 1691. Her remarkable revelations: the person is a young woman, unmarried, of the age of about 20 years, whose name is Janet Fraser, or, as we in the South used to pronounce it, Frissell. Who then lived, and yet lives, with her father, Thomas Frissell, a weaver to his trade, a man of unblamed conversation, in the sheriffdom of Dumfries, in the country thereof called Nithisdale, and Parakin of Closebon, 6 miles, or thereby, from the town of Dumfries. She is, and hath been for a long time, a person in the judgment of all that know her a serious Christian, and was for a good time before this befell her, more than ordinary exercised in private condition with God. as the relation after specified gives the reader a little touch. She can read print, but cannot write herself, but whatever she saw in vision, was at times able to give an exact account of it, after all was over, and accordingly did give the relation following to some creditable gentlemen, and some country people, her acquaintance. The time of my exercise was 8 years, and all this time was troubled with the appearance of a thing like a bee, and other times like a black man. And that also at several times, and in several places. Then at the end of the 8th year, I being at prayer, the black man did appear as at other times, he being upon the one side of me, and there appearing upon the other side a bony hand and a rod in it, and the rod was budding, and I said, Is that thy hand and thy rod, O Lord? And I was content to embrace the one, and flee the other. Then, upon that night 8 nights, I was coming home near hand unto my dwelling, I grew very drowsy, and fell asleep, and there was a voice said to me, Awake, why sleepest thou? And there was lightning round about me, and I looking up to the top of a bush that was at my hand, there was the shape of a dove that went alongst with me in company to the house. Then, about 3/4 of a year thereafter, the rod appeared again to be a double rod, or a rod that was springing and forthcoming. And after that time I was never troubled with the black man any more. Her first revelation was on the 4th of June 1684, but it is very difficult to make out what her visions portended. On the 5th day of November, 1684, I being at prayer, there appeared unto me, in a bodily shape, 3 persons, as to my sight all in white, and they go round about me the way the sun goeth. Their coming was still after one manner, when I was at my duty, only I discerned he that spoke first at one time. Spoke first at all times, and so continued to speak by course, with scripture notes, naming books, chapter, and verse, sometimes all the verse, sometimes a part. She was greatly concerned about the suffering remnant, and had many mysterious responses as to that. This intercourse with spirits continued for some years, and is very circumstantially detailed in the MS, at the conclusion of which is this additional miracle. Besides what the reader has had formerly, he has likewise this following account of a passage that befell this holy woman. The May 1st 1687, which was Sunday. This Janet Fraser, and a young lass, a sister-daughter of hers, about 17 or 18 years of age, having gone out into the fields, and both of them lying down on the grass near the water of Nith, which is but a bow-draught from her father's house, and both of them reading their Bibles, and lying about the distance of 4 yards the one from the other, this Janet Fraser is taken with a great drouth, and goes to the water of Nith to take a drink, leaving her Bible open at the place where she was reading, which was the 34th chap of Isaiah, from verse 5 to 11, inclusive, which begins, For my sword shall be bathed in heaven, behold it shall come down on the people of Idumea, and upon the people of my curse, to judgment, etc. And when she had returned immediately as soon as she could take a drink of water, she sees her Bible is colored with blood, as she thought, though afterwards, upon inspection and trial it was not blood, but red as blood, and such as no person by the color could discern from blood. Upon which she asks the other lass, if anything had been near her Bible? And she answered, nothing that she saw. She asks, how could it then be that her Bible was covered over with blood? Which both of them going near, found to be the very same place where Janet was reading, viz., from verse 5 to 11, and some farther of the 34th chap, so as the print was not at all legible. The other lass would have her wipe off the blood, but she could not, but carried it as it was to her father. And a brother of hers, a godly young man, who is dead since, and some others, and did show it to them, who were curious to taste it, and it had a Welsh taste, as if it had been some meteor, the hens and birds would not pick it up. The very next Lord's Day, May 8th, this Janet being in her father's barn about an hour alone, some little time before sunset, she came to the door of the barn to read, and while she was reading, about the 49th verse of Jeremiah, the like blood did cover all that place which she was reading, viz., from the 46th verse to the 54th, as I remember, so thick as it marred all the print and made it unintelligible, nor did she ever perceive it fall down upon the book, or observe it till it did cover and spread over all that place. And it is to be remarked, she was standing within the door, the thatch of the barn being over her head and over the book that she was reading on, and that the blood covered the print in the very time wherein she was reading, it spread over that part of it. The very next Sabbath thereafter, 15th of May, while she is again in that same barn, reading the 14th chap of Revelations, the like blood fell on the book, and covered all the chapter from the 9th verse to the end of the chapter. In the very act of the reading it, and which, she said, that she perceived it not, but about half an inch's distance from the book before it fell down upon it. The relater Arif is Maester Henry Maxwell, of Dalswinton, who dwells within 2 miles of the place where she dwells, saw the Bible, and the blood upon all the 3 places of that Bible, which is still extant. It is not blowed, for it is as tough as glue, and will not be scraped off by a knife as blood will, but it is so like blood as none can discern any difference by the color. After this course of vision and bloody showers, Mrs. Fraser, it would appear, fell under the suspicion of dealing with evil, in the place of good, spirits. For in the year 1691 she was called before the presbytery and confessed, that she pretended to prophesying and seeing of visions, and that she had sinned greatly in being deluded by Satan, causing her prophecy and see things future. Her book was appointed to be examined by 2 of the presbytery, and on her second appearance she acknowledged that she was possessed by some evil spirit, and humbly besought the prayer of the ministers and of all others, upon which the further examination of herself and the witnesses was delayed. Nothing more is heard of her. Records of Penpont Presbytery, 1706. From January to March in the year 1706 the Presbytery of Penpont was occupied with the case of the Reverend Peter Ray, minister of Kirkbride. Mr. Ray was slandered by a woman who alleged that he called her a witch, and when sick said to her, "They say you have my health, so give it again if you have it," and also called her to come near hand him, and when she came he presently bled her on the forehead. It was proved that Mr. Ray did call her a witch, and did in his illness endeavor to draw blood from her brow, for which he was rebuked. In 1737 Mr. Ray was translated from Kirkbride, an extinct parish in Nithsdale now embraced in the parishes of Durrisdeer and Sanquhar, and became minister of Kirkconnell. He was also clerk to the Presbytery of Penpont, before whom in earlier years he appeared. He is perhaps better known as the author of the history of the late rebellion, 1715. A man of outstanding ability, his memory is honored by a mural tablet placed in the south wall of Kirkconnell Church. Glencairn Kirk Session Records. April NWH, 1694. Case of Margaret Mkinch, not Monrick, as given by Monteith. In the evidence it is stated that Robert Muir in Dunragon came in to James Rogerson's house, drew his KNYF and offered to blood her above ye paper torn breath. On April NWH, 1694, marked. Mkinch gave in an written list of ye names who had slandered her by calling her an witch, earnestly desiring ye session to put the same to proof that she myght be free from ye scandal. Gap in the Records, 1694 to 1700. September 10, 1704. Appoints that it be publicly intimate upon Sabbath first that no heriter, tenant, or householder whatsoever within this paroch reset our harbour Jonet Hairstains, sometime in Keir paroch, with certification. September 24, 1704. Appointment obeyed in making intimation anent Jonet Hairstains, reputed to be under the mala fama of witchcraft. November 14, 1707. Case of Alexander Duarte, Alex. Duarte, gardener, at Maxwellton, is charged with having brought back some stolen goods by charm or enchantment or some other pretended occult quality in herbs. Along with some mutterings and gestures, as makes him so commonly reputed a charmer that he is sought unto by persons from divers corners of the country to the great scandal of religion. The said Alex, being interrogated primo, did you bring back those things which was stolen from Maxwellton A's, 6 pair sheets, 10, undecipherable, 3 aprons, at one time, a large silver tumbler at another time, and a book at a third time? Answer. Yes, I was the causer, but had no hand in it myself. Question. Did you not take money for the bringing of them back? Answer. I told them I could do such things if it was not injurious to any, and told that he took money for the bringing of them back. Question. How did you bring them back? Answer. I cannot tell that, for I promised not to tell where I received my art. Question. Did you make use of herbs as it is reported of you in order to the bringing of them back? Answer. I did make use of herbs in part, but not for the bringing of them back. Question. How did you make use of the herbs that you might know where they were? Answer. I laid them under my head and dreamed of them. Question. What are the herbs which had that effect upon your sleep? Answer. I will not tell that to any living if they should saw me asunder. Question. How came the clothes back? Answer. I must cause some brother of trade who dwells near hand them to tell them who have them that they must be brought back and they should not be wronged. Question. Why did you not tell of the people who took away these clothes, seeing thieves ought to be discovered for the good of the country? Answer. It doth not belong to me to put out any man, otherwise I should be in eternity this day 8 days. Question. Did any person bring the things back, or how came they back? Answer. I brought them not back, but the people who took them away brought them back. Question. But how could the silver tumbler be brought back and put in a fast-locked room? Answer. The person who took it flung it in at the window upon one of the shelves. Notandum now it was told him that all the windows were fast-snecked, as the servants who went in to take up the tumbler declared. Question. Did you not say when the tumbler was got, I must have the hair that was in and about it? For it is the hair of a horse which belonged to a man who is shortly to be hanged for stealing. Answer. Yes. Q. Did you not say to Sir Walter Lorry, lock me ever so close in a room and I will cause all the clothes that were taken away hang down upon the spouts of the tower upon the morrow morning? Answer. Yes. Question. Did you not say before me, the minister, lock the clothes again in as fast a room as you can, and I'll cause them, for a little money, go all back in the place where they were? Answer. Yes. Question. Why did you not bring back the silver spoon that was lost? Answer. It was in Edinburgh, and the name was scraped out, and I could not bring it back until I went to Edinburgh. Question. Why did you not bring back the mattock and other things? Answer. It had been on fire. Question. Why did you not bring back all the aprons, for there is one of them a-wanting yet? Answer. I could not bring it back because it was burnt, and when a thing is hid beneath the ground or the like I can't get what of that. Question. Did you not mutter some words when you used these charms? Answer. Yes. Question. What are they? Answer. Clothes, 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 and other things lost. Question. Whether did you use such charms afore Halloween as throwing nuts in the fire, sowing seeds up and down the house, and herbs to every corner, going backwards from the fire to the door, round the clothes backwards, up the stairs backward, and to your bed backward? Answer. Yes. Question. Being told by a minister that from what he had heard there was either devilry in it, or he was the thief himself. To which he replied, I shall make it out to be no devilry, or if it be devilry, it is unknown to me. Question. Did you not bring back a book of Mrs. Violet's? Answer. Yes. Question. Did you not say you could cause any woman in London come down to you if but told her name? Answer. I could do it, and I can. Question. Did you not say in the presence of Sir Walter Lorry, Bailey Corbett in Dumfries, James Gordown, Writer, Year, and me, that you could cause any of us dance naked? Question. I did, if you would take what I give you, and also added that he could cause any woman follow him if she would take what he would give her. Question. Alexander, where learned you that art? Answer. I learned it from the gardener at Arnistown, now dead, but was at my brothering. Question. But are there any alive that was at your brothering? Answer. No, after all which, the moderator said unto him, Saunders, did you not say to me when I was posing you privately about these things, and telling you that from all I had heard from you that I was convinced that you were either a thief or a devil, and you replied, Pursue me, sir, before either session or presbytery, and I shall show that I am neither. And now, Saunders, after all these interrogatories are considered, I rather think you did take these things yourself, and therefore you can get no testificat, certificate, until your business be further cognosed upon. July 13, September 21, and October 26, 1712. Complaint from Jean Howatson in Nice that Margaret Nivison in Critchen had called her a witch and a resetter of witches. Both rebuked for their scandalous and offensive expressions, and enjoined to abstain from any such offensive carriage in time coming. Certifying withal that if they be found quarrelling with one another unjustly this process shall be revived again upon them. Indirect references affecting Durrisdeer and Torthorwald. Parish of Durrisdeer. In 1591 a member of the family of Douglas of Drumlanrig, Barbara Napar, spouse to Archibald Douglas, was accused of witchcraft and condemned to be burned on the Castle Hill of Edinburgh. Examination of the indictment shows that the charge was really implication in the crime by countenancing and seeking help from users and abusers of witchcraft, which, as we have seen, carried with it the extreme penalty. The following is the extract from Pitcairn's Criminal Trials, May 8, 1591. Barbara Napar, spouse to Archibald Douglas, Burgess of Edinburgh, brother to the Laird of Carshigill, dilated of Sindri Pointus of witchcraft, continit in Diddy Gewin in against here be Mr. David Ngill of Cranstown Rydell, advocate to our sovereign lord. The assize, be the mouth of Robert Cunningham, Chancellor, fand, pronunciate, and declare it the said Barbara Napar to be filet. Culpable and convict of the seeking of consultation from Annie Sampsown, ane which, for the help of Dame Jean Leon, Lady Angus, to keep here from vomiting Tsuhan ski was in breeding of barn. Item, for the consulting with the said Annie Sampsown, for causing of the said Dame Jean Leon, Lady Angus, to love here, and to give here the gear a win here again, and giving of ane ring for this purpose to the said Annie, quil ski had sent her ane kerchief, of linen and SWA for contravening of the Act of Parliament, in consulting with here and seeking of here help, being ane witch, etc. Dome was pronunciate against Barbara Napar, the sister-in-law of the Laird of Carshigill. Torthorwald, 1596. As Saul consulted the witch of Endor, so in later days was the powers of witchcraft invoked by the most exalted to find out what fate or fortune the future held for them. Of the wife of Captain James Stewart, Earl of Arran, it is told that she got a response from the witches that she would be the greatest woman in Scotland, and that her husband should have the highest head in that kingdom. Both which fell out, for she died, being all swelled out in an extraordinary manner. And he, riding to the south, was pursued by the Lord Torthorald, called Douglas, whose whole family the said Captain James intended to have extirpated, and was killed, and his head carried on the point of a spear and placed upon the battlements of Torthorwald Castle. Thus concludes Chapter 3 of Witchcraft and Superstitious Record in the Southwestern District of Scotland. Please feel free to watch the next chapter, Fairies and Brownies, and feel free to keep up with the many current or future installments in the Weird Audiobooks YouTube library by subscribing.